Thank you, everybody, for joining me today for the 25-4 partner release webinar. If you haven't been a part of these webinars before, the partner webinars, what we do is we will go into a little bit more depth on a few of the enhancements. We won't cover everything that we tried to cover in the client webinar. I apologize, we have it a little backwards than we normally have. We had a shuffle around our release schedule. And so normally, and in fact, next release, we'll have it the other way. Like traditionally, we have the partner release first, just so you can get used to it. It is in your POC, so you'll be able to use these things ahead of time. In fact, you can still use it ahead of time because we aren't releasing until Monday. On the 9th is still the scheduled release date. So, of course, today is the 3rd, and here you can see the release date is February 9th is when it will be released to the clients. Any active clients are going to see that update to 25.4 here. If you go to your POC today, we'll be able to see all the new features available now. And certainly you can get used to them, set them up for demos, or just be prepared if you have clients who are asking questions. So with all that being said, we do have a chat available. If you do have questions, we have a few people that are monitoring the chat. I'll try to monitor as well. So if there's something that comes up, I can answer questions live. But I do have a certain little agenda I want to try to cover. And let me share my browser here with what I would like to cover in the agenda, which are fewer things, and like I said, than the the client webinar that we did a few days ago. So I want to go into the HR enhancements and talk about the project only work location and the early break return warning that you could set up on the timesheet. So let's go ahead and go over there. I'll go ahead and open up HR in another tab here to get over there, because obviously these are going to be settings that we're going to put in the settings here. Of course, you can see some of these things in self-service, but we're going to talk about the configuration of them here. So the first one is the project only work location flag. And where that is configured is on the work location itself. So you may already be bringing in work locations from your ERP or the client's ERP, like Intact as an example. Maybe you have different work locations coming in for different projects. Is the actual address or the location of the project versus, let's say, the headquarters where the company is located, or maybe they have different branch offices, but it's not those things. It's actually where folks go out in the field and they perform the actual work at a work site. So that's what our definition really of a project only work location is. So I have a few of them set up here as an example. You can see dig site, school construction, housing build project, and you can see those right here. So when I click on one, of course, nothing has really changed up here at the top. Still have the code and description, and a lot of this stuff is going to come over from the ERP. Depending on which one we're bringing it from, we're going to get the code and descriptions. Sometimes we get a little bit more, like we might get the address. And so you'll see here as an example, there's the address in Hartford, the geocode and things like that. Nothing is new as far as that is concerned. And just like before, you can come up and set up a geofence like I've done here. You'll see if I zoom in, I got a little geofence there. If you're not familiar with how to set up the geofence, once you zoom in on the map onto where the work site is or the job site, you can use these up here to draw a shape like I've done around this particular area here. So you can draw a square, just click there and draw, well, not a square, but a rectangle, I should say. So it could be really any size you like as far as the rectangle is concerned. You can actually draw multiple. So if it's like, okay, on this side of the street and, over here as well, I could do that. And of course, I can draw a shape. So like I did here with the many sides, you click and you just kind of drag a line where you want the shape to be. And it could be really whatever you want, when eventually you'll get to an existing line and it'll fill in. So this is nothing new there, but just so you're aware of how to do that in case you've never done it before, you can see how that works there. And of course, when I draw a shape or whatever, they can be overlapping like this. So if you need to do that, you don't need to worry about it overlapping. All right, just again, I'm going to cover it because some people aren't necessarily aware. This allows you to say what happens if somebody clocks in. They're supposed to be at this work site. They're claiming they're at whatever the dig site is or something like that. and they're outside of it for whatever reason. Now, maybe they're many miles away, maybe they're in another state because, things happen, and maybe they're assigned to a location, but they're not actually going there. So you may want to allow the punch outside the geofence. So that allows this to happen. So, sometimes the phone just shows them on the street and they're really right there, just whatever reason the phone's not as super accurate and it shows them there, or they're in a building and it shows them somewhere else. Now, you might say, yes, we want to allow that, but let's send a punch to a manager or supervisor or something like that. So we'll send them a notification that so and so clocked in outside the geofence. Just as information, again, you might want to review it and see, okay, yep, they were, very close to it. Perhaps the phone was just inaccurate, or we're just having some GPS issues where it shows everybody across the street. Now, to resolve that, you might just make the geofence bigger. But if you do see them, over here and they're getting something at lunch and they're clocking in, okay, well, maybe that's something you needed to worry about. All right, so that's what that could be for. And then this is actually a feature that is not brand new to this release, but is new. I think it was the last release, where you can require a note if they're outside the geofence. So again, they clock in, it pops up a message on their phone and it says, we see you're outside the geofence, please put a note as to why. And maybe they can say, oh, my phone just is acting strange and it's showing me across the street, but I'm really here. And, put that there. Or they might just say, yeah, I remember how you told me to go over to, the hardware store and buy some stuff. That's why I'm over there. So, they could put that note there for the manager to see, and it would be included in that notification. All right, of course, these settings would be individual to different work locations, so you might have different requirements for different ones. Now, into the addition we have here is the coordinates here. This is a new field that allows you to say, here are the actual GPS coordinates we're going to use if somebody uses a device that doesn't have GPS. So let's say you have a kiosk or a clock that's at that work site. You want to know where people are, because this goes into the map view of where the employees are. If you want to put the coordinates here, you can click on here and you could set a pin for where that particular coordinate is. So you can, place it down and say, okay, the clock is right there, as an example. And the system will record those GPS coordinates right there. This is not going to necessarily affect the phone. A phone that has GPS, it'll use the phone's location, but the kiosk, sometimes those tablets don't have GPS. It's an older tablet, or it's just one that doesn't have it. You want to record that. Maybe they're clocking in on a computer. Maybe there's a clock there, and you want to show those people who are clocked in using an alternative method of clocking in that they're there, so that when they look on the map view, it shows them there. So that's what the coordinates allows you to do, and then you can set up the time clocks to use those coordinates. And then we have the project only location right here. What this does is it doesn't really change really anything about the work location. What it's telling us is that we're using this for project only. We're not going to show it as a location for the employee's employment information. So let's say I go to Christopher here and I want to put his certain work locations here. It won't show in this list. So you'll notice that dig site is not here. It is a valid work location, but it allows you to keep this location list clean, because these are, think of it as like a actual location where you're going to have many employees, and it's not just a temporary situation. Now, of course, work sites can sometimes be many months or years, but you don't want to necessarily assign somebody to that work site. They're just going to be there to work, and then they're, maybe going back to the warehouse or something like that. So this is where their primary location would be, as well as maybe any other ones. So they might be commuting. It's a little bit of a distance, but from Norwalk to Hartford or something like that. So you could do that right there. All right, so that would help to clean up this list to show only the valid office sites and those types of work locations where somebody is. Helps to make that clean right there, but still allows it to be a work site. Now, regarding the who's working and where people are on the map, this is what would use that location, that those coordinates, to help find where people are. So you'll see here, this person, that little icon is telling me they use their phone to clock in over here. So he was over at this location, looks like a parking lot or something, to clock in. So that's where he was with his phone. These other people over here, this is a work site. They didn't clock in on their phone. They used a device to clock in, and this is where that device is located. So that's a little different there. You'll notice here it's showing the little house. It's not a phone. The phone icon, that's telling you that they're out using their phone to clock in. Now, if they're on the phone at a work site, it will still identify them there and everything, but it does allow you to kind of see the difference between the two. Still show people on a map where they are, even if they are not using a device with GPS. So the project only work location, that is great for that situation. Now, there are other things that can go into a work location that we've added enhancements over the last several releases to handle things like maybe you have a person who is working in one state, the work location is in a completely different one, but they're never actually going there. So you don't want to tax them that way. There are different location types that we've added that can handle that. So there's certain codes in there. So if you are, in need of that, if you have people that are sending, the work site's offsite, but they're never going there. They're in, let's say they're in Texas, the work site's in California. They don't want to go to California and worry about any compliance issues over there because they're not actually there. They're in Texas, so they have to worry about the Texas rules. But we still want to show them there as far as working and charging hours to that project. So that is where the location type can come into play. It does require certain ones, and there's documentation about how that would work to say that they are working in one place and the project is somewhere else. All right, so that is a lot of detail into work locations and the project only work location flag in specification there. And if you have any questions, don't hesitate to reach out. We're happy to answer questions on that. You can import this if you're using the data templates to import. You can add that in the data template. Of course, you can't currently update the project only flag through an import. It is something that you would have to go through and update those projects. If you have many of them, let's say you had 1,000 different work locations, please reach out to us. We'll see if we can do some type of database update to that, so you don't have to go to all 1,000 of them and update. But it is something that going forward, if you add new ones, either it'll come over from the ERP and we can have it checked that way, or when you're importing in the work locations in the templates, it can be flagged that way so you don't have to go and update them manually. All right, so that is the project only work location. All right, early break return warnings. So what this is for is when people are on a break, you might want to, or the client might want to set a minimum time for that break. And they may want to have a mechanism that says you cannot clock back in early. Some states require a 30-minute lunch, or the company or union might say they get a mandated 10-minute break at 2 hours, and it must be uninterrupted. So when you build in breaks into the timesheet, you can put in the minimum return for a break. So here's an example of a break here, and you'll see the different rules. I'll go over this very quickly. Of course, you'll want to name the break to kind of represent what it's for. If you have maybe a 2-hour break, and then there's a lunch break, and then there's a break at 6 hours, you may want to call them something appropriate so that everybody knows what they are. This actually shows up in the parentheses right here. You see where it says break. That's because the name of this is break. If I called it lunch, this drop down would say out lunch. If it said 2-hour break, it would say out 2-hour break. Whatever you want to call it, it's going to use that one there if that is the timesheet layout for that employee. This is the income code it may be tied to, and is that paid? So maybe their 10-minute breaks are paid and their lunch break is unpaid. So you can set those up that way. Right, here's the minimum amount of time that must be, recorded in the system before they can use this break. So again, where those things come in with like a 2-hour break, a lunch break, a 6-hour break, or whatever it happens to be, you could set a minimum. And now it doesn't necessarily, if you have a 2-hour break, need to be 2 hours. Maybe you say, well, their 2-hour break, they could actually take a few minutes early. So let's make it 1 hour and 45 minutes. So if I was to do that here, I might say 1 hour, 45 minutes, just like that, just in case you're not sure of what that M means. That's minutes. and H is hours. So 1H 45M is an hour 45 minutes. All right. Here is the notification that you may, it's not required. You'll notice how this is required, this is not. You may want to send a notification to people to let them know they need to take this break. So perhaps at an hour and 45 minutes, you might say, your 2-hour break is approaching. Please make sure you take it in the next 15 minutes or something like that. So you can have a notification going out there, and you could set that. If you don't want that notification, you just leave this blank. If you did want it in an hour and 40 minutes or something, just like that. All right, here's the length of the break. So 10 minutes is the length. And here is the minimum return. So this is where you could have the system lock them out basically from clocking back in until they've done 10 minutes. So if I were to do this, you'll see here, if I clock out for that break, let's let it clock out here. Let me allow the, all right. So when I go to clock back in, it's going to say, you can't clock back in. You haven't been on your break for 10 minutes. So I'm going to let a little bit of time go, but that's what that will allow me to do, is set a minimum there. And like I said, maybe the union says it has to be at least a 10-minute break. Of course, they could take longer. Maybe it's 15 minutes or whatever. That's fine, as long as it's at least 10 minutes, that's the break. Now, there may be situations, and this is what is new, where you want to allow them to clock in, even though it's required that it's 10 minutes or a 30-minute lunch or whatever the situation is. You want to allow them to clock back in early. You can do that. So it's kind of like a soft cap here. Yes, it should be 10 minutes or 30 minutes, but maybe it was like an emergency and they needed to come back in, and we got to take the lunch penalty or the whatever the hit is to that early or that short break. So you may say you are required to take a 10-minute break. If this is an emergency, you are allowed to override this requirement. All right, whatever your message might be about this particular break. And this is for this break. So you might say you are required to take a 10-minute break every 2 hours or something like that. And so whatever you're going to say here for that. And of course, you may have language or multiple languages you're supporting. So if you want to put it in Spanish or French or whatever, you could put the same message there in those other languages. Of course, you're not required to do other languages. You are required to use at least one language. You could put it in Spanish only or French only. You are required to at least to put it in one language when you do this right here. All right, so when I do this here and save that, it's now established that. Let me go ahead and set that up right here. All right, let me go back over here. I'm going to refresh, and I'll go ahead to clock in. It's been, a minute or two. So when I come in here and I say I'm going to clock back in, remember it's only been a couple of minutes. Oh, I guess I might have had my system. Let me just check here. Let me cancel. I think I might have my system auto-generating a timesheet, so it will not let the hours overlap. Let me check here. What is today, the 3rd? Okay, so one of these is there's my break right there. 10, let me see, is this one? I just want to see which one overlaps there and get rid of that. You probably won't have a situation like it does that right there. So you ignore that message real quick. This is what it's going to do. Here, I'll go to clock in. And you are required to take a 10-minute break. If this is an emergency, you're allowed to override this requirement. Proceed, which will clock them in, or cancel, which will not clock them in, and they'll continue taking their break. And this message will go away if it's been at least 10 minutes. So if I hit proceed here, it's now going to let me take that 3-minute break, and it started the clock over at 10:19. All right, so that's the early break return warning, and this is set for each break. So maybe you don't have the requirement on the 10-minute breaks, but you do have one at lunch. You can set up different ones in here. You might have your lunch break at 4 hours or something, and you set it up there. And the other breaks you set up do not have that requirement. So it is an individual setting for the break itself. All right, so let's talk about the next one, which is a payroll enhancement for time off, payout, and cash out income configuration, because sometimes companies will allow a cash out of some type of time off, maybe vacation or paid time off or whatever it is. and they want to allow that cash out to happen. So we have that now. You can actually set up, we've had this for a while, where you could set up a plan to allow a cash out of vacation or whatever time off you want. So let's just go into this one here. It's nothing new that we have that they can do a cash out of this. What is new is this drop down here where they can use a different code. You'll see here, like I'm using PTO or the normal vacation request. If they do a vacation request, if they do this vacation cash out, I wanted to use the vacation cash out income code because some companies want to track that separately. They want to have a different account in their general ledger for the cash out versus with a normal vacation. So this is what allows you to do that. If you want to use the same code, you certainly can use the same code for both, but this gives you that flexibility to do this. And you could tell it to not only use a different code, but let's say you've got a salaried person and they're normally getting $2,000 a week for their salary. You could tell the system, all right, rather than replacing that $2,000 with some amount of cash out, let's say $500 of cash out, what would happen is normally if you think about PTO, all we're doing is we're just saying, okay, instead of $500 of vacation, it's now, or excuse me, $500 of salary, it's now $500 of vacation, still ends up being $2,000 of salary. What we want to do is add this cash out on top of that salary. And that's very important. A lot of companies, if they do the cash out, they don't want to touch the salary. They want to pay it in addition to the salary. So that's what this allows you to do here, as well as just use a different code. All right, so that is the new field here. But how do you set this up? Of course, there's a few things you're going to need to do. First off, you'll have to have that income code. I think it might be kind of obvious, but you'll need to have that income code to handle that cash out. So I've set up one just like this. All right, so there's my vacation cash out. Of course, it is cash. It's regular, pay it out hourly, but I want to exclude it from the salary so it doesn't replace the salary. It adds to it when I actually pay it out. Now, the other thing is what type of time off, request is going to be used for these cash out / payout things. Now, maybe they're not putting a request in at all because you're doing the cash out or the payout upon termination, and the employee doesn't need to go and do a time off request for this. But sometimes companies allow a cash out at any time or at the end of the year or something like that. So you might need a time off type to handle that. So they make that request there. And you'll see here, if I go over to my time off types, I have a couple of these set up here. I have PTO and I have vacation cash out. So here's my vacation cash out because I'm looking at the vacation plan. So I made a code here, description, vacation cash out. The one thing I need to do here is put true right here. Now this does a couple of things. First off, because I have this type here, when somebody requests time off, they'll be able to see this as an option to request time off. But because it's marked as cash out, it will allow them to exceed 24 hours in a day. Because a normal time off is going to not allow you to go over 24 hours in a day, as well as it may do things like look at the schedule and are they scheduled for that day and how many hours are they scheduled and so forth. This completely overrides that and just says whatever the request is, assuming it's approved, is what we're going to cash out. They may ask for 300 hours if they have that amount banked up, and of course there's not 300 hours in a day, but this allows you to do that there, and it won't look at the schedule or anything like that. So this does need to be configured here. It does need to say true there to say that it is a cash out. So any of those codes you want to use as a cash out, make sure you put true there. And I don't know why I have it on PTO. I'm just going to remove this one here because that might have been a legacy thing I put in there. But you may have ones for different types of timeout or time offs that are out there for whatever your plans are. But any of the cash outs you need to mark out as true. Now, it is certainly possible you have existing time off plans. And you may notice when I go into here, I cannot add a time off type code to here. So this is where you may need to reach out to support and say, we need to add this time off type code to the plan so that we can use it. Because if it doesn't already exist, if it's already been set up and I can't touch it, there's nothing I can do from the front end to add it. However, we can help you out with that. We lock this down simply because it causes a lot of problems if people remove this, and we help to take care of that situation if there's ever a situation where you need to change something. So reach out to us. We'll be happy to help you to add codes if you have to. All right, so once this is here, I believe this person has vacation. They do. So they have vacation right here. And let me go to his time off just so you can see he has 88 hours of vacation there. So he can now say when he adds time off, I want to use the vacation cash out. And you'll notice here's a little different. When I do a vacation request, I've got the start and end date. I have the start time. But when I do a vacation cash out, all those options go away because they don't apply. All I'm doing is saying this is the amount of time that I want to, cash out here versus it's an all day thing or it starts at 8 a.m. or, whatever. I'm just going to say, you know what, on the 6th of February, I want to cash out 40 of my hours. Now, this is where your approvals will come into play because you can say, all right, for the time off type of vacation cash out, it needs to go through, whatever. So you may have a workflow out here. Let me go to the workflows for that specific time off type. You'll see here if I go to my time off request, I can say for a certain time off type, let's say just vacation cash out, it's going to follow a completely different workflow, perhaps, than a normal vacation request. Maybe it needs to go to accounting as well as the manager or something like that. Or maybe you can just bypass the manager because they don't really care. They're not leaving. They are going to be there, but they're cashing out their balance. So you may have a completely different workflow here. Maybe you want to identify it as such. So you call it vacation cash out. All right, happens in self-service. And you can, of course, specify which group it's for. I'm going to just say all employees, but it could be a very specific group. It does need to be active. And then here, the initiator, of course, is going to be the person requesting it. And where is it going to go? All right, maybe it's going to go to accounting. So I might say, a certain position. And let me pick, let's see what I have out here. The CFO. So they're the one who's approving any vacation cash out requests. All right, bypasses the manager. Manager's not really concerned about it. Doesn't affect their, their workforce or anything like that. So doesn't matter. Now, maybe you want to notify the manager. Of course, you could add that. They could be involved here. You could, of course, have multiple steps in here if you like, but you can have a different approval for that if you want to do that. And so when I put in my 40-hour request here and I submit this, it might follow that new workflow to get approved before it actually would then, hit my payroll. Now, of course, how does it get into payroll? Now, this is nothing new here, but just want to point out, I think I have an older payroll out here. You do this through the import. There's a load right here that says load time off cash out payouts. So this would load into there because it's not on the timesheet. It's not part of their 40 hours there. It's a separate thing. This also would handle if you're cashing out upon termination and they have a certain amount of balance upon termination, you're going to go ahead and cash or pay that out upon termination. So that's what that would be for there. All right, so that is this income code configuration. I'd like to cover a little bit more if you've never seen it before so you understand what that is all about. All right, I'm going to go over into the four different, scheduling enhancements right here. So let's hop over to scheduling. The first one is sort of a minor improvement in that it doesn't really change the functionality. It just changes the view on things here. So previously what happened, and in fact, it even shows this way now, the week always visually showed that it started on Sunday, regardless of whatever you had up here as the actual start of the week. So if you had a week that started on Saturday and it went Saturday, to Friday or whatever, you kind of had to think in your mind, all right, how do I set up that sequence right so that, if there's a rotation, I put it correctly and it rolls over right on the actual start date of the pay period, which is Saturday or the week that's Saturday instead of Friday. And so you just had to, kind of get used to that. But now let's say I make it Saturday. It actually shows as Saturday here. So a minor, but I think really nice improvement because now you don't have to do that, calculation in your head of where does the week start and end. It just shows it right here. So very simple one, but I think it's a crucial one there. The next one is auto-populating the timesheet from the schedule. And this is something where we support the auto-populating of the timesheet. Some people will use that to just give people, let's say, 8 hours per day. They don't really have a schedule. They just give them a certain amount of hours per day because maybe they need to record hours, like they're salaried, but they want to show 8 hours a day or something like that. And that can be done still through the work period. So here you'll see I have a few different ones. Let me just click on this one to show you an example of this. I have a work period here for Monday. You'll see here from 8 to 12 and 1 to 5. That's 8 hours. So there's the 8 hours is going to show there. And of course, I could do this for the other days of the week here. And, 8, 8, 8. Oops, not 88, 8, and 8. All right. And of course, this could be different for different days of the week. However, this is not a very good scheduling tool because if this changes from one week to the next, it's kind of an employee maintenance headache because you got to go to the position and change it every week. And so it's good if it's, somebody is literally Monday through Friday, 8 hours a day. You could put that in there. Maybe you don't even break it out like 8 to 12 and 1 to 5. You might just say 9 to 5 and gives them 8 hours. All right. So you could do something like, or let's say 8 to 4. All right. And then just put that for every day. So that's one way you could pre-populate the timesheet with hours. You'll notice here I have to put in the times. So if I tried to save without the times, got to do that. So oops. Now what I do, just to be honest, when I'm setting these up, I just copy and paste. So you can see here, kind of easy, gets it done very quickly. And I've set these up a lot because a lot of times we find that salaried people, they are salaried, but they need to record the hours maybe for a retirement plan census or something like that. They want to show the person actually worked 40 hours in the week, or at least that's what they were, said to be working. Of course, maybe it was many more hours than that, but they need hours on a timesheet. So you might set something like this up, and then you assign this on the employee who you want to pre-populate. Let's just say Jody is one of those people. And I would go to her position, and you'll see a field on here called work period. And that one says 9 to 5, but let's say I wanted to use that one I just created. And it's going to go ahead and create an 8 to 4, Monday through Friday, 8-hour, entry on her timesheet, assuming I'm telling it to use the work period. So that is, it's been here for many years and you can use that still. But sometimes you set up shifts for people and you've got a shift out there, let's say for, this week, and you've got all these different people scheduled, but the company says, we just want to pay the hours that are on the schedule. People are going to come into work. They're going to work 8 to 4:30. Yeah, maybe they'll come in 2 minutes early or 5 minutes late or leave early or late. It doesn't matter. They're going to get paid for these 8.5 hours. All right. But next week it might change. Maybe next week she's going to be off on Wednesday, but work Saturday. So we want to have that flexibility of scheduling, but we don't need them to clock in and out. We want it to pre-populate and maybe they'll go in later and edit it. But we want to have that nice flexibility of the scheduling module to be able to change this from one week to the next. Can't really do that with a work period because as you see here, it's on the job. And obviously that'd be kind of manual work every period to go and edit a work period and change that. So we've added that functionality now to the timesheet to say, where do you want to get your pre-population from if you're going to do it at all? So I'll go to the timesheet layout as an example. And let's say I go to this salary one, doesn't really matter which one. You'll see right here, auto-populate hours. And of course, you don't need to. You can say do not auto-populate. You can say use the work period, which I showed you was that very simplistic one, or use the shift assignment. Now, this, of course, applies to everybody within this timesheet layout. If I say use shift assignment and only a few people have a shift assignment in the scheduling, only a few people are going to get those populated hours. Just like with the work period, if only some people had the work period, only some would get those populated hours. What you can't do is say, use the shift assignment, and if they don't have it, or maybe I prefer the work period for some people, use the work period for those. The only way to do that now would now be to create a second timesheet layout for those people who are using the work period. So you could do that, have two timesheet layouts, one for shift assignment, one for work period, and that would be fine. But you can't do it within the same timesheet layout. Now, of course, if you do not want it to auto-populate, the easy solution is don't create a shift schedule or a work period for them, and it won't auto-populate regardless of the setting in here. All right, once this is set here, what this means is when you go create the timesheet for the period, it will auto-populate that timesheet. So if I go to team timesheets here, and I think that was the this salaried one, but I think I might have one in hourly as well. Let's do that one. And I create timesheets for a period. I don't know if there's one created for, there's not one created right here. If I go ahead and add one, what was her name? Desiree, I think. There she is. If I add a timesheet for her, it will create those hours. Now, it does mean the schedule must be created. So even though I have it set that way, if she doesn't have a schedule for the 8th through the 21st, it's not going to create the hours for her because they don't exist. But when I do add this, if she had a schedule out there, you'll see how it created those hours. Now, her schedule did not exist yet for this week, so it didn't create it, but it did for this one. All right. Now you can automate this if you want to, make it very simple. Maybe you've got all salaried employees, but you need to show 40 hours per week. Or you've got this whole scheduling thing. You want it to auto create timesheets for people. That is something you can do through the system tasks. So you could say every Sunday morning at 1 a.m. or something like that. Let's go ahead and create these timesheets. All right. I have a couple of them here. You'll see. Let me just go into this weekly one. So I called it create timesheet. I tell it to do it weekly at 1 a.m. on Sunday. And here is what I tell it to create. So you'll see here it's the system type, task is timesheet create, and then I tell it which timesheet I want to use. I can use multiple if I want to do that. What it will do is it'll look, does a timesheet exist for this person? If it does not, create a timesheet. Now, maybe they have that auto-populate. It'll pre-populate the hours. If it's a horizontal, there is a setting in horizontal timesheets to even create the tasks and projects based off of the previous timesheet. So there's a lot of flexibility in there. If you need to use those horizontal timesheets and have it pre-populate the not only hours, but you can also say pre-populate the projects and task information. All of that can be done through this schedule if you like. All right, so just to go back, that is the auto-populating right here. Let's talk about position types, seniority for shift scheduling, and the mass creation and deleting. So when you're setting up a shift, either the shift groups here, and I'll click on this one as an example, you can set requirements. What we've added is this position type and seniority. So this is looking at the position types within the system here. And I could say, all right, I need customer service reps who are full-time here. And this will mean when I go to schedule people, by default, it's going to look for customer service representatives whose position type is full-time. Now, when you're scheduling, you can override those settings if you like. That's something you need. Maybe all your full-time reps are on vacation and you're going to have part-timers do it or something like that. You can override that if you like to, but this is going to apply to all the shifts within this shift group. Same type of thing with seniority. They need to have at least a year of experience as an example. So this is years. And so that would be the settings now for this shift group. Now, if you say, well, that's maybe too restrictive because, we want to say in the morning is when most of our calls come in and we want to make sure we have everybody who's got the most experience. You could set this up on the shift as well. So here you'll see what this would do is it would look at that shift group set schedule that said, hey, we need a requirement that had customer service reps who are full-time, but rather than being 1 year, now it's looking for people who have 10 years of experience. So that's what that would do here. Or maybe this is where I want all my full-time people and I don't set it up on the shift group. So you could tell it to either override or this is added to. This would be an override, which means use these rules instead. This would mean add to the rules to the shift group. So those two new fields are available there. And then within the assignment area, when I go to do the scheduling itself, and this is going to be done by managers and so forth, when I add somebody, we now have those two columns here that are right here on the right. There's position type and seniority. And so I can see those right there. And maybe I want to sort by this or, find the people who have the most years of experience and so forth. And this is where I was saying I could override those requirements. So my requirement was a customer success manager, I think, or customer service rep. And all of my customer service reps are already scheduled, so I don't see any, but I'll need somebody to cover, and I'm going to choose the assistant manager or something like that. So those two columns are available. Now, when you are making scheduling happen in here and you're creating the schedules, you may not want to have them go out to the employees right away because you're still working on it. and don't want to advertise that to the employees that the schedule is ready. So now we have a default status of draft when you're creating a schedule here. And you can also mass create the schedule. So let's say I want to schedule out the next 6 months. And, previously you could do this manually one at a time for every week for the next 26 weeks. Could be very time consuming to do that. So instead, I can say, you know what? I want to just create schedules starting the week of the 22nd. And let me just copy from the existing schedule. And now I want to add many weeks to this. Let's just say instead of 26, I'm going to do 13. So it's about 3 months worth right here. And I'm not going to have them published right away because I still want to go and tweak them. So I'm going to uncheck that, or not check it, I should say. And it's going to go and say, oh, okay, here's what we're going to do. We're going to create all these schedules. Are you sure about that? And yes, I am. And now it's created them all very quickly. And of course, now I can go in and I can edit the schedule and move people around or whatever I need to do. You'll notice here the status is a draft. So maybe I'm ready for this one on the 15th, made all my changes and everything like that. I can publish it. This will notify all of these employees who are scheduled that their schedule is now visible to view. If I said, whoops, I need to really change that, I really made a mistake, I can unpublish it. It makes it so it's not visible to the employee. Unfortunately, the notification's already gone out. So they might log in and say, where's my schedule? You say, whoops, I messed up. But that is the draft there. And then you'll see here deleting. Now, I can only delete this one here because we don't allow gaps in the schedule. Like I can't delete this one on the 12th. I'd have to delete all of the ones after it first. And I could do that one at a time, just hit the little trash can and delete them, or go into the schedule, hit delete there. But I can also select 5 of them that I want to delete. Now, you may notice if I leave a gap, it won't let me mass delete. They all need to be consecutive. And now I can delete all those out there. All right, so that's the different things we added to the scheduling, the position type and seniority for shift scheduling, the mass creation, deletion, and it really should say publishing of schedules out there. All right, the schedule, of course, the notification will be over here and in email, text messaging, and mobile. All right, let's talk about the referral bonuses. This is kind of a big topic. And it might be the last thing, because I actually I showed the map view and kind of the daily punch board. That's right here. But let's talk about the referral bonus one, because this one has, again, a lot of configuration behind it. So sometimes you want to have referrals for new applicants and candidates. And if they get hired, you're going to pay, some type of bonus to the employees who recommended these people. So I refer, John Smith to work for Sage because I think it's a fantastic place to work. He applies, he gets the job, and maybe at 90 days, I get a $200 bonus or something like that. So an example of that right there, you can set up a referral bonus. So let's go ahead and look how this is configured here. Now, the first thing is, how are you going to pay this bonus? So you do need to set this up. Even if they're not using payroll, we still need to set up some of the things because we make the income code required. So you do need to, I don't know why I clicked on deductions, you do need to set up an income code to handle that. Now, you might use an existing code like bonus. They're already using payroll. They have a bonus code. You could do that. So what you need to do is just have a amount-based income that you're going to use for this. All right, so I'm going to use this one called bonus, but they certainly could set up one called referral bonus or something like that, so you can separate it from other types of bonuses, and you may want to do that as you need to. All right, so that is kind of the first step. There is the setting up of that income code where it's going to land. And like I said, even if you're using, another system for payroll, but you want to track referrals, we do need to have a referral bonus income code. All right, so that needs to be set up there. And then we need to set up the referral plans, which I could have sworn they were under referral, but let me just hear it. They are under payroll administration. Of course they are. The funny thing is these are related to recruiting. You don't need to buy payroll to have this. But here's my referral plans, and you can have multiple. I have one, but there's no reason you couldn't have multiple here. So here's my referral plan. So you'll see some of the requirements. The one thing I mentioned is that income code right there. All right, so I've got the referral the name of the plan. So, maybe it's named after a department or job title or whatever. Maybe just one plan, you just call it referral bonus. It's really up to you on what you call that. Here, you do need to select which income code you're using. You'll notice just the amount incomes are here. My hourly are not there because it's an amount I'm paying out. Here's the default amount. So if you have it in the employee handbook that they're going to get $500, that's what that will do here. This will give them $500. So you can build that right into the system right there. All right. And then automatically split. So what happens if two people recommend this person, or three or four or 10? Do you want it to automatically split up that bonus? Just, take 500, divide it by 2 or 10 or whatever. Or are you going to handle that yourself? Because maybe, one person referred them and they applied and they made it to, the final round. And then suddenly four other people, said, oh, by the way, yes, I really like that guy. I recommend him too. And you're going to give most of the bonus to the first person because they really got it moving. And the other people just, kind of glommed on at the last minute. So you may not want to equally split it. So you don't have to equally split it, but this would allow that easy math to happen and just divide it and have that go through. All right, the notification. So you don't need to do this, but you may want to notify one or more people as that bonus effective date comes in. So the effective date is not necessarily the date of hire. It might be 90 days after the date of hire. And you want to let people know that it is coming because sometimes you forget. Yes, my friend got hired and he's doing great and everything like that, but I kind of forgot about the bonus because it was 3 months ago that he got hired and I got a million things on my plate. So maybe you want to send a notification to like HR, you want to send one to the employees who did the referral, to, I don't know, the CEO, whatever. You can set that up. And here's when it will go out. 2 days, weeks, or months, you choose before the effective date. All right, so that's what that would do there. You don't have to do a notification. Maybe you're really on top of it and you remember, and you can certainly have good memory and do that. But this would allow you to have those go out there. All right. And then finally is, when do you actually pay out that bonus? Do they need to work a certain amount of time? So maybe it's 60 days from the date of hire. Maybe it's a certain day that they need to reach. You can build that in right here. Now, these are things I couldn't override as well. So I've got 5/1/26 here, but if you want to put in 90 days of service or something like that, you can build that in there. You'll notice here a little help. It shows, I think it will show in the webinar. It's a formula field. So DOS, days of service, YOS, years of service, QOS, quarters of service, first date of subsequent month, or a specific date. All right, so you can see that right there. All right, so after all of this is set up, of course, you save this. Now, if you do set the notification, you must say at least one person will be notified. You can't set this and then tell it not to notify anybody. So you do need to do that there. But once that's configured, you can now use it in recruiting, as well as you can just track it in HR, because maybe you're not using us for recruiting. It doesn't hurt our feelings so much, but you want to still track that. But here I can show it on a candidate. So let's go ahead and put it out on Cecil here. And let's say he was referred by somebody within the company. Now, this is not something that we have the candidate select an employee to say that they recommended them, because we don't want to have the employee list just out there on the web for people to just download and do whatever they want. So it does require like a recruiter or somebody like that to come in here and say, Theodore, he was the one who recommended this person. Here's the plan they selected and the date of their referral. So, this might help you to decide, if there's no automatic split, who gets the most, if that's something you're doing. So that's the date that they referred that person. And of course, I could have multiple people here that are being referred. All right, so you'll see that right there. And of course, you could track, as many different people as need to. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get hired. It just means that they were referred by somebody. So this is a manual thing here to add that to the candidate. When somebody is hired, if I go through the hiring process, there will be a step called referral, where if there's somebody here, it will pull it in automatically, and it will set up that link between these two employees for that referral to happen. You can also add it manually at that point, because we realize that sometimes you're not using our recruiting and you still want to track that information and add that referral to a new hire. So it is in the new hire process here. You'll see here, referral right there. And let's see if how quickly I can go through here. Shoot, I need to put an address. And I think I got everything. Let's just see if there's anything I'm missing here. There we go. So you see how it pulled in Theodore. Now, maybe somebody else, did refer him, and for whatever reason, I never attached it to the candidate. That's where I can add him here. Or maybe I just hired him manually without going through the applicant. I can add them right here. So very simple to do that. All right. So you can see where that is right there. And let me just finish off this new hire here. I'm not going to worry about onboarding for this moment. And I have a new hire workflow. So I did have to go and approve that. But let me show you where this goes on the employee. There is now a referral screen where you can track that. So you'll see under payroll is referrals. And here is tracking this. Now you'll notice there's two columns. One is employee referred. The other is referred by, because certainly Kennedy here, once they've worked for the company for a little while, they may say, this really is a great place to work. I'm glad that Theodore recommended me. I'm going to go recommend somebody else. And so they can refer others. So that's where this is here. You can't have where I am referred by myself or something like that. It's one or the other. But you'll see here how I can update this if I need to. Maybe I will need to put some notes here. Maybe Theodore got laid off and I need to remove him, or somebody else did say something and I didn't catch it until today and I want to add one in there. I could do that here. All right. And if I go to Theodore, I will be able to see the opposite of this on his referral screen. So now he's referred two people. Right. And I can see that right there. And here you'll see the bonus effective date. That's when he's going to get paid. And you'll notice right here is a indicator that he has been paid, as well as the pay date that he was paid. So how does that get into payroll? Of course, I should mention I could manually add ones here. So if I want to say, I referred another person and add somebody else, I could do that right there, fill in that information. All right, but how does this person actually get paid? That's going to be, I believe I have payroll open right here. No, I don't. All right, so in the payroll process, when you're looking in that payroll batch, you will see a load referrals right in here. So this is going to look at that effective date for the payment. So let's go back. The bonus effective date 3/27 and 5/1. Let's say pay date is today. It's not 3/27 or 5/1, so neither of these would get loaded in there. Let's say Christopher quits before that date. I'm not going to get paid because he's no longer an active employee. So you can, have that so people don't get paid for that. Let's say now I'm running payroll, the first payroll after the 27th, it's the 28th or the April 2nd or something. It'll see, this is now effective, and it will pull this in if I select load referral bonus. All right, so you'll see here, it's not showing anything here because it's not that date yet. And I still get a chance to select them because I might not want to pay them out. Maybe you have a rule that says they work 90 days and then it's the first payroll after that, or I don't know what it is, but first payroll of the month after the date. You can, not load them if you don't want to. But you'll see here, I would just check the box. It's very similar like an expense report or a commission, where you can select who is going to be paid, and then it will add it to the payroll batch. It will put whatever that pay code is in there if it's not already in there, and it's going to pay that out. And then when payroll is done processing, it'll mark off and it'll say it was paid on 4/2. So it'll mark it as paid yes, and then the pay date will say 4/2. And of course, it's going to be on that person's pay stub, so they'll see that they got paid. All right, so that is the referral bonus system. And as I mentioned, you can have many different referral plans, and of course, different referral plans for different employers and all those different things for referral bonuses. I mentioned the map view of employee clock-ins when we were back over the project workflow work location. So that's available here. This is also what we call our daily punch board visibility. We call it who's working. So that's what this is showing here. Now you do need to enable this widget. So that enablement of the widget happens. Let me go to my settings here. Under ESS widgets, you'll see a widget checkbox called who's working. You need to check that off. All right. And then in the security, you can also control who gets access to be able to view that. So I'm a system admin. When I enabled it, it's visible immediately to me. However, maybe this employee, let me just see if they already have it, because I might have already turned it on. They don't. So I can go out here to the self-service and I can add that who's working right there. So it does need to be enabled on the security profile as well as just enabling the widget itself. Just like other things we add to the system, we don't automatically give full access to new things like this because many times companies don't want it and it might be confusing. So we do require you to enable it. All right. So once I did this, if this manager, somebody with his manager security profile logged in and the ESS widget was open or added, they'd be able to see this right here. There's also a menu item for this. If I go over to my timesheets, you'll see who's working. Same thing. If I click here or if I go to here, it's the same screen. You'll notice here, this gives a little bit more detail there. The widget will only show 5 employees. So right now I have 3 employees working, which is just fine. If I have more than 5, it does go to different pages, kind of like the notifications. So if I've got, 6 employees working, I would need to go to page 2, or I could just search, by typing, is Andre working? And, now he's going to do this. He's going to show up there. Now this is semi-real time, I want to call it that, because what we do is we refresh it automatically. I believe it's like every 5 minutes. So it's not going to be like see it tick over a second, it hits 1 minute and so forth. But if I do want to refresh it, you'll see there it says updated every 5 minutes, but I can refresh it at any time like this. Now this is hours and minutes, so it's not seconds here. So it will show you that. And of course, it's only who's currently logged in, who's currently clocked in, I should say. If somebody's not clocked in, they're not going to show up here or on this screen called who's working. This is something that is, of course, a little bit configurable because maybe they don't necessarily need the work location or they want to show project. You can add some columns here if you need to do that. You'll see some additional columns that are available. Project might be important, work location not so much, but maybe the sub-project is important. You can turn those on. Maybe the middle name is good because there's some people with the same last name or something. And of course, you can rearrange these however you like. Maybe you want the first name first and then the middle and last name, you can do that. And this would allow you to save that setup. Okay. And so now same thing where it's showing the time worked here. And I could refresh this to see this update if it did. I'd be able to see that here. And this is going to show many more people than just 5. I can't recall if we just keep scrolling, if there's more working or if there is a page cutoff. If there is a page cutoff, it's going to be a minimum of 25 employees before you go to the next page, but you'll be able to see those right here. You also have these options where if you want to narrow it down to a certain project, task, location, etc., you could do that. And here I can say, oh, I only care about the California project. And so those 2 folks, are these 2 employees who are working there will show, the other person does not. And I'd have to remove that to show this. And if I want to go look at the person's timesheet, I can click on this. It'll take me to their timesheet. You'll notice here it opens up as a new tab. So if I want to get back to the who's working, I'd have to go back to the tab where I started. But it did take me to their timesheet. And the nice thing about this is if you have multiple timesheet layouts, you don't have to go to team timesheets and switch them back and forth. You can see here and just go click, and it's going to go to that specific timesheet for that employee. When I'm done here, close this up, and I'm back to the who's working. All right, so one more thing to cover, just a very basic one out here, is the open enrollment announcements. Now, I don't have one here because I've completed my open enrollment, but that is another thing that you can enable in self-service is an announcement of open enrollments. I guess I could have gone to that tab. So in the ESS widgets, there is notifications and information. I thought there was a thing that you can enable at the top to, maybe they just automatically is there, but it will show notification. Where those are coming from is in open enrollment. You can have a notification when enrollment is in progress. So you'll see here, well, this one is obviously a little bit older, but open enrollment has started. Please complete your enrollment by X date. So this is an example of announcement there that would show at the top of self-service right here. They can dismiss the message if they want to ignore it, and then it'll come back tomorrow if they haven't completed it. So it'll stay up here at the top up here above the feed until they complete it. I believe the color is green, if I'm not mistaken, or yellow. So they'll be able to see that. And it's, of course, visible in mobile as well. All right, so we are at the top of the hour. I do want to thank everybody for joining us today. We did record this, so if you want to share this with your colleagues or revisit it, you can do that. Here's a reminder that our release date is Monday the 9th. Here's upcoming Criterion/Sage HCM Learning Series webinars. We do have one a little bit later this week on the Affordable Care Act. So if you're in the US and you need to do Affordable Care Act reporting, we're going to cover how that works there. And then we're going to talk about things like GL account mapping in a couple of weeks, jump over to learning management and payroll processing as we get into March. So you can see our upcoming training that's out there. We always encourage our partners to send their clients over if they're interested in stuff, let people know about it. We, of course, you do try to let our clients know, but sometimes it's, better to tell them twice than to just tell them once. So welcome to join or spread the word to your clients. And I do want to thank you for joining us today. As always, we appreciate you and everything you offer to our clients and all the support you give to us. And I do want to thank our developers for all these fantastic enhancements that they added to the system. And always encourage you to, reach out if there's anything that you need for your clients, any new enhancements and stuff, please reach out to us. We're happy to evaluate those and see how we can make the product better for you and your clients. So once again, thank you for joining us, and I hope to see you again next time.